as some of you know, HEMA has been a part-time study of mine for actually almost 7 years now at this point. And my main course of study has been Marozzo, and then outside of that, expanding into the further Bolognese system, and then just kind of adjunct things, as well as, of course, looking at the empty hand stuff, because that suits what I do. Obviously, having studied some Savate back, in the early 2000s, going back and looking at the historical Savate, which is so much better, has been really helpful. And then looking at the English boxing that Savate actually padded its hands out with, and getting a sense for what the period style boxing was is so much better. And then as a catch wrestler, obviously catch wrestling goes back to this period as well, and digging into the old catch wrestling sources, and again, adjacent grappling sources, has been just absolutely invaluable. But let's face it, the reason that you join HEMA is because you want to play with swords. And, I'm no stranger to that. So here's the thing, Bolognese fencing is plenty popular. Not everybody in the Bolognese side of things does Marozzo, but Marozzo is one of the easiest ones to grasp onto because he has pictures, and most of the others don't. And that's really useful because you don't just have to rely on descriptions. You actually have, in the earliest, some woodblock prints, and in the later edition, you have some copperplate prints. And this gives you a sense of what he was describing as your guard positions. Although I hesitate to use the guard. He does use the term guardia, right? So he's talking about guards, but in other systems in the Italian traditions, they will use more like position. In Fiore, he uses posta, right? Which is more like position as opposed to guard. You can think of them almost as ready stances as opposed to strictly guards. Anyway, the point here is that one of the big mistakes that I see when people are doing Marozzo's assalti, especially the first one in wide play, right? Because just like anything else, the early things are going to be the ones that get the most coverage because they're the ones that people focus on first, right? And the thing is that as you're going through the assalti, and this doesn't only apply to the two-handed sword, this applies to all the weapons. As you're going through them, don't always assume that you're going to be throwing these big circles. Just because you're in maybe an awkward position doesn't mean you're going to be throwing big circles. Italian fencing, and specifically Bolognese fencing, is often seen as very flowery. And to a degree, it's got some style points. But it's not just that. In fact, so if you use the Jarek Swanger translations, which are my preference, he goes into great depth on how and why he translated certain things certain ways. And that doesn't mean he always gets it right, but he's much more transparent than others are. No shade on Bill Wilson, but his translation of Marozzo leaves a lot to be desired, but it is free and available. So like that does beat a $50 book. Anyway, one of the things that Swanger talks about in his translation is that Marozzo will often use Molinello, which is kind of an alternate or a corruption of like Molinetto, which is used in other Bolognese traditions, which, if you're familiar with French, Molinet, right, it's basically just a circle, right? And then you have Tramezzone, and Tramezzone is sometimes used in ways that may seem interchangeable with Molinello, and then other times maybe not so. And then you have Tramezzoncello, which is just a diminutive form. And Swanger says that he thinks that Marozzo is using them more or less interchangeably, but he can't guarantee that. And I'm going to say that through context, I think that Marozzo does mean different things with them. And the big thing is, I think that when he's saying Molinello, he's mostly talking about a larger movement. And I think when he's talking about Tramezones, he's talking about a smaller movement. In specific, I'm going to say that the way that I look at Tramezones is you're mostly looking at kind of small conical or elliptical movements, whereas Molinello or whatever is going to be more like the whole big wrist spin, wrist and elbow spin kind of deals. And again, there is some interchangeability with that depending on what context you're in. So I don't think Swanger's 100% wrong, but I do think that there's a small a small differentiation in the sense of perhaps how big it is. So to bring that out, let's just talk about the first move of the first assault in wide play, which is to say that you're starting in guardia di testa, and I'm going to back up and show you this in a minute, but you're starting in guardia di testa, which is, it's basically a very high frontale, slightly canted, but whatever, right? And you're going to do a falso implantado, which is a throwing thrust, which you can kind of think of as like a cut into a thrust, but you're actually faking that to go into a mandrito, which is just a normal overhand right hand cut, which is a very, very standard move. And you're doing a step with each of those moves, right? He says you move your left and right feet, and during that you do the mandrito with the tremazzone, and he does say tremazzone here. And I see a lot of people do this with a big circular motion. Just because you're doing a falso implantado does not mean that you're doing a rising thrust, right? Remember, falso just means false edge. And implantado just means a throwing thrust, as opposed to a cut or something, right? So there's nothing in there that describes an upward cut. And if you're already in an overhead guard, it would be kind of awkward to do a false edge cut into a mandrito with this big circle. Now, different people have done this different ways, but it gets a little awkward. And I don't think that Marozzo is being flowery for the sake of being flowery. And there is a small circle variant that I favor that I actually think is more martially acceptable, because let's face it, even though he was teaching university students, he was still a master at arms, right? He was still a fencing master, and that generally means that he knew how to fence, right? And so he would not be doing things overly flowery just for the sake of being flowery, right? He might have wanted some style points, because doesn't everybody? But I don't think he's just making arbitrarily large movements, right? So I'm here in guardia di testa, right? Head guard, right? And I've got the cross guard right around eye line or so, right? And all you're doing is just trying to catch something here. Keep in mind, a proper two-handed sword has a longer handle, and it's actually got small lugs up here, about a hand or so away from the guard. So you'd be catching a sword blow playing fine here. You're not worried too much about your hands. But this is more a ready position. So if I'm here and I'm moving my left leg and I'm moving out here, and he just says move your left and right legs. He doesn't tell you how, right? But we're going to assume we're coming offline just a little bit, because he wants us to go outside our opponent's sword blade to his right side. So I'm going to take that line on a slight angle out. Now, I could try to circle my blade and do a rising falso. Doesn't really make sense if I'm following up with a mandrito, which is going to be this direction. I could do a falso coming up this way, except this is a falso implantado, right? We're looking for a thrust. I'm probably not thrusting him in the crotch, so there's no reason to go out of my way to come down with a big swing and come up that way, right? It is much easier to do a thrust with this conical motion. So as I'm stepping, I'm coming in, winding the tip in a conical motion, throwing, right? And because I'm offline here, and the guy's going to be uncovering his line to block that or move, then from here, because this is a feint, what's going to happen is as he goes to block, I'm going to dip my tip and come straight through with that mandrito, right? Mandrito squalembrato. Now, he just says mandrito. Usually he doesn't mean fendente, because he says fendente when he means fendente. But squalembrato just means diagonal cut. He doesn't always define, but because that's the most normal overhand right-hand cut, that's generally what you're going to go with. If he means sideways, he'll say tando. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm pretty comfortable with that standard overhand right-hand cut, especially because this is the first move of the first play. So as I'm in here, right, and I'm up, in my guard position, I'm literally looking at, like, I'm guarded on the front line. I want to make sure that the guy's not coming in at me. So I press around, make him uncover and block, feint out, and cut. That makes so much more sense to me than throwing these giant butterfly wings of circular motion that are just going to be breaking your rhythm. And the thing is that you can apply this lesson across the board as you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into the assaulting, and especially once you get into the narrow plays, and then you get into entering into presse and in the second and third assaults. And then as you break into the other weapons, into the pole arms, go back to the single-handed sword and whatnot, you're going to see that you don't necessarily need to make these ridiculously large movements, right? You're not drawing a Lorenzo tractor or anything like that, right? We're not trying to do these gigantic, flowery movements. Well, all we're trying to do is to make our opponent behave in ways that allow us to get to what we want. We are trying to create predictability patterns for our opponent. And so these conical motions, right? And even here, I don't need to wind all the way around, right? I'm just coming here, I'm just dipping under his sword and cutting down through. And that's enough, right? What's gonna happen, right? Because our opponent is supposed to be in, where is he supposed to be? Porta de Ferro Alta, something like that. If you see a thrust coming in, aren't you probably going to just block, right? When you're sword fighting, if you don't ever just like cover and then try to return or something like that, you probably haven't been learning sword fighting very long. It's pretty instinctual to just cover that line, move offline, and return. So if somebody's feinting in and I do this and then he ducks under my sword, and as I'm trying to come in, whoop, there's his sword. What's he just done? He has created a predictability pattern in me by making me uncover my line to defend so that he can strike in the empty spot. Makes a lot more sense. But the overall point of this video is not to fix this section 1 for everybody, right? Because we don't know for sure, and everybody's allowed their own interpretations. And at the end of the day, if you're making it work, it's not wrong. But let's think about efficiency. And if we can make moves as small as possible without losing efficacy, don't we want that? Sure, go for style points. But remember, style has to come on top after function, right? Style is the cherry on top. Style is not the thing that makes the thing go. So I think that's all I have to say on this, right? But as you're going through, Marozzo and the Bolognese things, if that's what you're studying, and honestly, with anything else, anytime that you see a movement going from one guard or position to another, and you go, how are they getting there? Don't automatically assume that you're going to be doing a lot of rotational movements. Sometimes yes, but sometimes you're not doing these big rotations. And if you are doing rotations, sometimes they might be conical movements where basically the tip of the blade is scribing a circle, but the whole blade is not scribing a circle, right? Something to think about, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Check us out on our other socials, and please head over to blacksunboxing.com to get a little more info, including how to contact us. Furthermore, if you are in the Phoenix area, please feel free to stop in, say hi, join in for a class, whatever. Also, if you ever see us cite sources or just for additional content, please check out our Substack. That is where we put all of the sources we use in our videos and is a major part of this. Plus, it serves as a membership platform for long distance learning and for people who would like to support us but aren't local. We would greatly appreciate it if you signed up. Even just the free membership helps us out a lot. All right, I will see you guys in the next video. Good journey.